Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, December 14th, 2006. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week we talked to Ed Westemeier, Communications Director for the Beer Judge Certification Program, better known as the BJCP. We'll talk about some of the background and history of the program and what its role is in brewing today. I've had a lot of good feedback on the past two episodes where we talked to Maureen Ogle, author of Ambitious Brew. Most of the feedback was like this from Norm in Ontario, California. Norm said, I just listened to the two-part interview of Ambitious Brew and really enjoyed it. Very good bit of history there, especially the part about how Americans' tastes went to bland after Prohibition due to the overall food profile becoming bland. Norm says, I was feeling a bit nostalgic last week and was thinking, wouldn't it be nice if I could go back 25 to 30 years? But after I reflected on that a bit, I decided it wouldn't be so great after all. Over the past 15 years, I've gotten used to being able to start my day with very flavorful coffees, and I enjoy daily very flavorful foods accompanied by wonderful artisan breads. And I have this great selection of craft brews or the ability to make as good or better brews myself today. I decided that in terms of food overall, this is probably the best time in history in the U.S., and I would agree with that. If you look for the good stuff, you can find it nowadays. Now, I do have one clarification. Dan, a listener who didn't tell me where he's from, wrote in to say that the Volstead Act did, in fact, prohibit home brewing. And Maureen had said on the show that it was legal to homebrew during Prohibition. Well, it turns out it wasn't. It was legal to have alcohol in your house and serve it to your guests if you had bought it before Prohibition, but making it still no good. Maureen says, he's right. I misspoke, which often happens. It amazes me how much I can't remember about all this stuff I just researched in the past 2 years. I usually have a cheat sheet when I do an interview, but I forgot to grab it when I was talking to you. So there you go. And I believe, to be fair to Maureen, I believe in the book, I don't think she even addresses the question of the legality of homebrewing during Prohibition. So there you go. It turns out my grandpa would have been in trouble with the law, even if he wasn't planning to sell the stuff that he and his brother were making in the kitchen during Prohibition. Jason from Kentucky writes, my wife watched the Extract Brewing DVD with me and commented that it was interesting and yet quite geeky. Guilty as charged, Mrs. Jason. Jason says, I assured her that all this geekiness allows her to go to the closet to select her beer of choice instead of going to the store. Well, she recently has taken up knitting and was having some trouble doing a particular stitch. I half-jokingly suggested she find a knitting podcast and see if she could get the help she needed. Well, guess what? There are a load of knitting and fiber-based arts podcasts out there. Now she's subscribed to a few and has found not only the help she needed, but a kind of entertainment and camaraderie among fellow knitters. Jason says, I've felt a bit of vindication as the geek pendulum in our household shifted away from me and back towards the center. Well, there you go. And just for your information, the geek pendulum never shifts away from me in my household. So I guess you probably could have guessed that. Brandon from Newport, Michigan writes with a very specific request. Brandon says, I recently attended Bell's Eccentric Day and did not take any pictures. For those who do not know what Eccentric Day is all about, let me explain. Eccentric Day is all about eccentric dress, eccentric ale, and this year, karaoke. And Brandon says, James, if you have never stood on a picnic table dancing and singing with your wife while drunk on Hop Slam, while Larry Bell is singing karaoke, well, you need to try it. Brandon says, okay, time to get to the point. There were lots of people taking pictures, and I would love to see some incriminating photos of myself and my wife to share with our friends. So there you go. It sounds like fun. If you have photos posted somewhere on the web of Bell's Eccentric Day, let me know, and I'll pass the info on to Brandon. You can find me at james@basicbrewing.com or use the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. I personally have a standing request to my wife to keep me far away from any karaoke machines. And that's after an unpleasant experience. Someone actually requested that I sing Don McLean's American Pie in karaoke on a bar. And, of course, that song is 3 hours long. So no more karaoke for me if I can help it. Jeffrey from Northern Virginia writes, after hearing last week's episode, he says, your recent podcast had a comment about using a party mix of nitrogen and CO2 for carbonating stouts and pub ales. I've made several Boddington clones that have turned out wonderfully using the party mix and a stout tap. I really enjoy the creamy body of the English bitter served this way. And Jeffrey continues, I was at a local beer and wine store where a microbrewer was sampling his various beers, and I commented to him that I'd made a Boddington's clone, and before I could say that I used the party mix, he commented to me that, I hope you're not using nitrogen. He said that nitrogen has no place in brewing, and that CO2 is the natural byproduct of fermentation, and that nitrogen was a gimmick used only by the uneducated beer maker, and has absolutely no place in beer making. Jeffrey says, I happen to really enjoy my Boddingtons served this way and plan to continue to make it from time to time. Good for you. If you make it and you enjoy it, go for it. I say, poo-poo to the other guys who say otherwise. And they can make their beer the way they want to. Jeffrey has a question, though. My question is, what other styles beyond stout and English bitters would you suggest using the party mix with, if any? And can a home brewer find a way to bottle this mix the way Guinness does? I've read about the widget, but haven't figured a way to put a drop of cold nitrogen in it for my own use. Now, coincidentally, Mr. Wizard of BYO Magazine answered a question about beer gas in the January-February issue of BYO. And essentially, he says there's no way that he knows of for a home brewer to do the nitrogen widget trick in a bottle. And I say play around with the party mix yourself with maybe small batches and see what mixes well. Who knows, you might find something new, a new combination. And once again, as for the guy who told you that nitrogen has no place, well, if you use it, you like it, go for it. That's the beauty of homebrew. Dan from Boise, Idaho writes, I'm a big fan of green bottle beer, and I'm learning how to make skunky beer. I was wondering if you have any information on how long, how bright, what point of fermentation or aging, and what spectrum of light you can use to ensure the chemical reaction that causes skunking. Are certain hops better suited for being light-struck, and is it absolutely vital to have or to use clear or green bottles? Well, I can hear cringing from beer lovers all around the world. Most people avoid skunked beer because the skunkiness is considered a defect or a flaw. Those skunky beers that you like so much don't come out of the factory or the brewery skunked, but usually because of the green bottles, they get that way because they're the way they're stored. As I said in response to the previous letter, home brewing is all about making beer that you like, and if you like skunky beers, go for it. Brown glass acts as a sort of sunscreen for beer, so if you're wanting skunky beer, go with the green or clear bottles. Probably any hop will do, since it's actually the light reacting with the isomerized alpha acids from the hops that causes the skunk. So, exposing those bottles to the light will do the trick. And it doesn't take long to skunk a beer. I even remember setting a lightly hopped Hefeweizen in a glass in the sun on the patio just for a few minutes one day when Steve and I were shooting, and then coming back to a very noticeable skunky taste, even in that lightly hopped Hefeweizen. So, Dan, green or clear bottles, and set them in the sun for just a few minutes, and then you could taste them to see if it's skunky enough for you, or, you can, through some experimentation, just see how long it takes to get that effect. And for the rest of you out there, just do exactly the opposite of what I just said to avoid the skunkiness. Okay, before we get into the interview, I want to do a shameless plug for our 2007 Brewers Logbook. They're now online and shipping, and I've noticed that some are ordering more than one copy, so I'm wondering if they're headed under Christmas trees somewhere. So if you go to basicbrewing.com and click on the banner ad featuring the logbook, or if you go to the shop and click on the book category, you can see a photo of the logbook, and you can see the sample pages that I've scanned to let you know what you're getting, the calendar pages, and the session pages where you can log the details of your brew session. So there you go. I think this will be a great tool for brewers, and when you get one, I'd appreciate feedback on the features and the layout of the book so we can tweak it for next year, if and when we decide to do one next year. Okay, the Beer Judge Certification Program, or BJCP, is the organization that provides training and certification to beer judges across the U.S. and around the world. To get some background on the organization, we talked to Ed Westemeier, who is the Communications Director of the BJCP. Well, Ed Westemeier, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you.
Now, the BJCP, the Beer Judge Certification Program, we've heard a lot about it, or we hear about it all the time, but I don't know how many people are actually familiar with the background of the whole thing, so I invited you on to help us out with that. First of all, I want to get some background on you, Ed. Tell me about your brewing history and how you got involved in the BJCP.
Well, I've been brewing since 1987, and I first encountered the concept of judging beer at one of the early AHA conventions that I went to when I watched Charlie Papazian judge some beer in front of the group, and it looked pretty interesting, so I thought I'd get involved in that. So I took the exam, became a beer judge in 92, and I've been doing it ever since. It's one of the most delightful hobbies I can think of, and gradually got more and more involved in it, and still am today.
And what do you get out of it?
I get a tremendous amount of fun in traveling to competitions and judging other people's beers, and I hope I can contribute a little bit by providing them with some good feedback to help them make even better beers.
And I would assume that your beers have gotten better over time as a result of your experience as well.
Well, there's no question about it. When you learn to train your palate to pick up on different substances, different flavors and aromas, and be a little bit more discriminating, it can't help but improve your own brewing as you learn which ingredients to change and which ones to incorporate that you haven't tried before.
And I would imagine that the field of beer has changed a bit since you first got into it.
Enormously. When I first started judging back in the early 90s, the typical beer being entered at a homebrew competition was, let's just say, drinkable. Whereas today, most of the competitions that I go to, the typical beer that's being entered is absolutely excellent, with quite a high percentage of absolutely outstanding beers.
And I would imagine that the BJCP has been instrumental in raising that quality, wouldn't you say?
Well, I would certainly say that. we like to think so, yeah. And I think it's becoming a pretty common impression among brewers, partly because of the fact that our membership keeps growing, and partly because of the fact that we've actually become recognized to the point where there are some breweries that actually use the BJCP exam as a hiring qualification for new apprentice brewers.
Wow, that's quite a compliment.
We are very proud of that.
Let's start talking about the BJCP itself. Give me some background on how the BJCP came into being.
It started a little over 20 years ago, in 1985, as a result of a joint effort by the American Homebrewers Association and the Home Wine and Beer Trade Organization, which is kind of the professional organization for retailers of brewing equipment. And the heads of those organizations got together and decided that it would be a useful thing to improve the overall quality of home brewing, to come up with some kind of a feedback mechanism for brewers. And so they developed the idea of having an exam to gauge people's knowledge of brewing techniques and beer styles. And they gave that first exam in 85 at an AHA conference, and the idea just became enormously popular almost overnight. The two organizations continued to sponsor it for about 10 years, and then their sponsorship was dropped, and the BJCP people who were heavily involved decided to keep it going and make it an independent organization, and that has worked out extremely well, so that today we have over 4,000 members, not just in this country, but in at least a half a dozen countries around the world.
In reading the history, it looks like the AHA was going to found their own similar organization, and that never came into being, or
that was the original thought that they had, but as it turned out, they really didn't expect the BJCP to remain viable as an independent organization. When it turned out that was in fact going to happen, and it continued to be successful, they came to the conclusion that there wasn't really any need for another judging program that they had thought about starting.
How did the independence of the BJCP at that point affect the organization?
It was a little bit rocky and disorganized at first, as you might imagine, but the organization just kind of came together and decided in the beginning to be a conglomeration of brewers and judges in different geographical regions. So we kind of split the United States into regions, 7 regions actually, and we held elections for regional representatives in each of those regions. And once we did that, we initially thought that those regional representatives would come together onto a board of directors and run the rather loose organization that way. As it turned out, we realized eventually that wasn't the best approach, since in order to have an organization like this, you needed to have a centralized database of judges and also for registering competitions. So it quickly morphed from a set of regional organizations into what it is today, the national or really international organization. But we still have the regional representatives that comprise our board of directors.
And how does the independence affect the sort of culture of the organization?
It probably gives us more flexibility, since we're not dependent on anyone's support. We don't have to really listen to outside advice or suggestions, and all of the input comes from the bottom up, from our own members. The members talk to their regional representatives. They also get involved directly talking with each other. We have a members forum on our website. So there's a tremendous amount of feedback going up, down, and sideways. And and it gives us the independence that we need to really be objective about everything we do.
And who is the BJCP today?
Well, we have the board of directors, which are 7 judges. We have the Mid-Atlantic region, the West region, which is California and Hawaii, North region, which is the northern states plus part of Canada, the Northeast region, which also includes another part of Canada, the Midwest region and the South region, and the Mountain Northwest region. So that's the way we have the North American continent divided. And each of those has a director. And those 7 directors are elected directly by the membership in their region. And they constitute the governing body, the board of directors. Of course, those 7 people can't do it all, so they have appointed quite a large number of directors. We're not elected, just appointed, and they run the program on a day-to-day basis. So we have a competition director, we have a couple of exam directors and associate exam directors. We have an IT director, we have a continuing education director, a communication director. So there's a pretty good-sized group of people who run the program.
What would you say the percentage is home brewers and what is professional brewers?
Oh, it's probably at least 95% home brewers, but we have actually have no statistics on how many of our members are professional brewers. That's kind of a gut feeling on my part, but I know that we have quite a number of professional brewers who are also judges and show up to judge at competitions.
And what does it take to become a BJCP certified judge?
An incredible talent for judging beers. No, actually, to become a member of the BJCP, all you really have to do is to take the BJCP exam. And the BJCP exam is really the heart of the whole program. It's fairly, well, I shouldn't say fairly easy, but it is reasonably easy to pass the exam. We've designed it that way if you're prepared for it. But it's fairly difficult to get a very high score, and we've designed it that way too, so that it's a good exam to test the basics, and it's a good exam to give us a real discriminating power for people who are very experienced and very, very knowledgeable. The exam is about 3 hours long, and it consists of 10 questions, most of which are essay questions. And during that exam, you are also asked to formally judge 4 sample beers. So we get to see how you give feedback, how you rate beers that are presented to you blind, and the combination of those, of the tasting part of the exam and the written part of the exam, are all combined to give you a score, and your score on the exam will give you your initial ranking in the program.
Where are the exams given?
All over the world. We have a schedule of exams on our website, and they're promoted by usually local homebrewing clubs or other organizations, and we have the person who wants to schedule exam simply get together a group of people who want to take it, and then they get the exam registered, and then we provide the materials for them to administer the exam. Then we'll have, maybe 5 people up to maybe 40 people at a typical exam. But they can be schedule. We have procedure on the website to let people schedule an exam in their area if they want to, but they're really given pretty much anywhere.
Who are the ones that grade these exams?
We have a group of volunteer exam graders, and these are people who are at least national level judges or higher, experienced in the program, who have volunteered to do the work of grading the exams, so that when the exams are administered, they go to one of the exam directors who gets some volunteer graders together, sends out copies, and the volunteer graders will typically take a matter of usually at least a month or so to go through the exams with a fine-tooth comb and very carefully evaluate every single answer, and then provide rather extensive, detailed feedback to the examinee of how they did on each particular question, what were their strong points and weak points, and how they could improve if they decide to retake the exam.
That was going to be my next question. If you completely bomb on the first round, can you take it again?
Yes, you can take it whatever you want to. There's a reduced fee for a retake. The initial exam is a $50 fee, and you can retake it for $35. The feedback that we provide is so extensive that it will typically run to 2 pages or more of detailed notes giving you an evaluation of every single question on the exam.
But now when we first started the telephone conversation, before I started rolling the tape, so to speak, I said that I wanted to ask you about BJCP classes, and you gave me an answer that I didn't expect. You said there aren't any BJCP classes.
True. You don't need to take a class to take the exam. You don't really have to do anything, although studying is very highly advisable. But a lot of people who schedule exams for groups in their cities will, to try to help people do better on the exam, set up a series of study groups, which are often in the form of classes that take 8, 10, 12 weeks before the exam, to try to get people to the point where they can do extremely well on the exam. And they're very often successful, but those are local study groups. They're not actually sponsored by the BJCP. They're not required by any means, so that we'll sometimes have a person who's totally self-taught and studying on their own, but make a drive into the nearest city where an exam is being held and take it without going through any classes at all. What the BJCP does is we publish a study guide so that people will know exactly what topics are going to be on the exam, what sample questions look like, and what to expect in some degree of detail when they come in to take the exam. But we don't actually run formal BJCP classes ourselves.
Yeah, that was a surprise to me. I guess that there are so many organizations, local organizations, doing these classes on their own that it seems like it's established by you guys, but it's not.
Right. What the classes are designed to do is to prepare people for the exam, and we make enough detail available about the exam, what the questions are going to look like, what the format of the exam is, and what the relationship between the questions and the study guide is, that people can usually put together a very good study group or set of classes to prepare people for the exam, and there's enough consistency from one exam administration to the next that those classes probably look very similar. to one another, but they're not actually BJCP classes.
Now, once your test is graded, how many different levels of judging expertise do you rank?
We start people out just passing the exam with the rank of recognized beer judge. And to be a recognized judge, you will need to get a score of 60 out of 100 on the exam, and you'll not need anything beyond that. And that's where most people get their first experience as a recognized judge. The judge who manages to get a 70 on the exam and accumulates a few experience points from judging in competitions can get to the certified rank. That's the second one. If you get an 80 on the exam and you accumulate 20 experience points from judging, you can become a national level judge. The next one above that is master judge, where you need a 90 on the exam and 40 experience points. And then there's grandmaster with 90 on the exam and 100 experience points, plus a service requirement. So, and then we have additional levels. We've got a few members who have actually reached the level of Grandmaster 3. Since each one of those levels requires a service requirement, they've done an awful lot of good for the program, and they've also judged an enormous amount of competitions, and they've done a lot of exam grading. So these are people who are extraordinarily active.
So when you say a service requirement, what kinds of things do they have to do?
Well, they have to grade so many exams, for example, and typically there's something else that's involved, like maybe proctoring an exam or serving in some office in the program, like an exam director, an associate director, something like that.
So no cleaning of mash tuns or anything like that?
Hardly any.
Once you become at least a recognized judge, then there are tons of competitions around the country that you can take part in. How many competitions, or I guess around the world as well, how many competitions does the BJCP have a part of?
There will typically be anywhere from a few competitions a month up to a couple of dozen competitions a month, depending on the time of year. So there's almost always going to be a competition around somewhere. Since we started the program, we've sanctioned almost 3,000 competitions.
Wow.
Not just in North America, but around the world. And with our 4,000 plus members, we've judged well over 300,000 beers in those competitions, and every one of those has received multiple sets of score sheets that have gone back to the brewers to give them feedback. So it's a tremendous amount of detail.
Now, each one of these beers is judged against a style guideline, right?
That's right.
How many style guidelines are currently defined?
You know, I couldn't even tell you exactly the number of styles, but for beers, we've broken them down into 23 different categories. And each of those categories has some number of subcategories. So, for example, you might have a category of stouts, and within that stout category, we've got 6 subcategories for dry stout, sweet stout, oatmeal stout, foreign extra stout, American stout, and Russian imperial stout. So those are 6 subcategories in that one major category, and 23 major categories. So there's probably somewhere around 100 total styles of beers. And then we have also categories for meads and ciders. So it's quite an extensive list.
And that list, it seems like it's growing, isn't it?
It is. Every time we revise the set of style guidelines, it gets longer, and the obvious reason for that is that one of the wonderful things that brewers do is to push the envelope and create new styles. And sometimes those become really popular, and other brewers decide to make them too. And when that happens, a new style emerges. One of the great examples of that would be the India Pale Ale category, where you started out with just English IPAs, and then eventually enough American brewers started making their own interpretation of that we added the American IPA style, and now we've added the Imperial IPA style as brewers started making even bigger versions of them.
Well, what's the adjective beyond Imperial?
Well, I'm sure we'll have to come up with one eventually. Some brewers call them double IPAs, some call them Imperial IPAs, but there's always a brewer who's trying to push the envelope in some way, and we'll come up with new styles. We have a style guide committee that gets together every so often to review them and see what needs to be changed based on what beers are out there in the marketplace, what people are making. And the last revision of the style guide was in 2004, so it probably won't be too long until it's ready for another revision.
So do styles get dropped as well as added?
Sometimes they'll get dropped or at least maybe renamed based on what we see, what's available. One of the things that we try to do is have the style guide set up so that we can list a number of commercial examples of each style, and that's to help provide some kind of objectivity. So if a person isn't really familiar with a particular style of beer, they can look at our set of style guidelines, find some commercial examples, and maybe go to the store and buy a couple of those and taste them so that they can get a good idea of what we mean when we define a style.
And I even found some flashcards on your website that people can use to get familiar with the styles as well.
Right. One of our members put those together, and they're quite popular, not only for studying, but they also work great to put on the judging tables at competitions.
Sure. And what are the parameters that are measured within each of those styles?
The basic parameters are the ones that we use on score sheets in competition. So we cover the appearance, the aroma, the flavor, the mouthfeel, and the overall impressions. And then for a number of the styles, we try to add a little extra information like the historical background and the ingredients and comments about the style to help people recognize it.
And these are pretty well defined so that the judges will have kind of an exact roadmap to compare these beer samples with, right?
That's right. The idea is that each one of the style descriptions is formatted in exactly the same way, so that if a judge needs a little refresher while he's sitting at the competition table, he can just look at the style guideline and very quickly refresh his memory and find out what he needs to know in order to judge the beer properly.
And a lot of these are pretty specific and don't have a lot of wiggle room, right?
Well, yes and no. The style guidelines are as specific as we can make them, but as you know, brewers are always pushing the envelope and trying to make their beer just a little bit different than the next brewery while remaining in that style. So sometimes it leads to a lot of subjectivity in the competitions, but the style guidelines are designed to minimize that.
Now, styles themselves are sometimes controversial in the world of brewing. Some people like them because it gives them something to shoot for, and other people don't like them because they see them as kind of constrictive, I guess. So I would guess that you would fall more on the side of the fence of being pro-style.
For competition purposes, absolutely. You can't have a lot of different beers entered in a competition without using styles because it just wouldn't be possible to judge them. It would become totally subjective. And also, I think the consumer, when he or she goes to the store and sees the word Pilsner on a bottle of beer or the word stout, should be able to rely on that to give a good idea of what's inside the bottle.
If there's a home brewer out there who's kind of flying by the seat of his pants and brewing beers that he's just coming up with himself, that's wonderful. But if he wants to enter them into a competition, he might find that kind of challenging then.
That's exactly right. And we try to cover that as well by having categories for specialty beers or experimental beers. And if a brewer really isn't certain where the beer belongs, they can always use one of those categories.
And if there are enough similar beers that are entered into the experimental categories, then the committee may create a style for the next time. Absolutely.
We modify the styles on a regular basis. The last time was about 2 years ago, and so we're probably getting close to the next revision of the style guides, and we'll be taking a very careful look at what's available on the marketplace and what people are entering in homebrew competitions, and there may very well be some new sub-styles added.
Now, we've covered the topic pretty well, I think, but you're communications director, so I'll give you a final parting shot, Ed. Is there anything else that you want to talk about the BJCP?
Well, the main thing is that we'd like people to know about our website, which is bjcp.org, and pretty much everything you'd ever want to know about the BJCP is on our website. You can look up the style guidelines. We have quick lookup section on the web. You can also download the style guidelines for printing in a wide variety of formats. You can get a calendar listing of upcoming competitions where beers are going to be judged by BJCP judges. You can register your own competition there. You can get a list of upcoming exams if you're interested in taking the BJCP exam, find out where and when they're scheduled. You can get the history. You can, if you're a member, do things like change your address and check your judging record. So we've got a lot of resources available on our website, so we'd just like to make people aware of that and invite them to use it.
And it's been fairly recently redesigned, right?
Yes, redesigned just within the last few months. That redesign is, of course, still ongoing, like any other website, but we're trying to make it very user-friendly so that only a click or two will get you to any part of the website.
Well, I think you did a great job. There's certainly a ton of information out there, and the contact page I found was a lot easier than the previous version. It gives you a better idea of who the BJCP is, and it's a lot easier to get in touch with you guys.
Well, I'm glad you think so. We have gotten a lot of good feedback on it lately.
Well, excellent. Ed, I appreciate your time.
My pleasure entirely.
Well, thanks again to Ed Westemeier for taking time out to talk to us. I hope to get more interviews with other BJCP officials in the near future to get more information on what they do, maybe get some hints on how to score well on the test and such as that. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. And while you're on our site, you can check out our online shop, where you can find great pricing on our DVDs and a combo deal to save you even more Christmas gift. In Basic Brewing, Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, we walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing, Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process from milling your grain to collecting your wort, and we do that in a nonlinear fashion. So you can choose whether you want to do a step mash or an infusion mash, and then you can choose whether you want to do fly sparging or batch sparging. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com, and if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online from us. Also, be sure to look for the 2007 Brewer's Logbook as well. Don't forget. And once again, thanks to everybody who's been clicking on our Amazon.com link and doing their holiday shopping. Some interesting stuff you guys are buying. I can't see who buys what, but it's fun to see. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer, production help for Basic Brewing Radio, and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson, who designed our logo as well. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.